Hi everyone, welcome back to Disney Magic Nostalgia. Yes, it's Lawrence back again, and what this review is a review of Disney's 1985 classic, the 25th official Disney animated classic, The Black Cauldron. Now, I've just sat and re-watched this movie for the purpose of this review. So, this movie was originally released in 1985, and it received mixed reviews internationally, such as Siskel and Ebert, the legendary movie critics, who unfortunately both are no longer with us, God bless their souls. They gave it positive reviews. I've just not, and it received a lot of positive reviews for its animation and its good storyline. And its score also did really well. It does have good music in it. It stars the voice of John Hurt as the villain. It is an absolutely, in my opinion, this is a great film, and this is one that's yet to even still get a Blu-ray release. Hopefully, it will. I think now you can buy the entire collection in one of all the Disney Blu-rays. It does come with a few DVD titles, and this is one of them that are yet to be released on Blu-ray. But as I say, I've just watched it again. I really like it. I first saw it as a kid, and I was a bit mixed on it because I watched it at a friend's house and didn't know what to think of it. Um, didn't know what I would think of it, but I actually really liked it. And then eventually we got it on VHS ourselves. My family did, and it's actually really good. Um, okay, yes. So, yes, the film is narrated by John Hudson, and the star cast include Grant Bardsley, Susan Sheridan, Freddie Jones, Nigel Horhone, John Byner, Arthur Mullett, Lindsay Rich, Brandon Cole, Gregory Livingston, Gregory Livingston, Ida Reese Marin, and Adele Malice Maury, Bill Hayes, Phil Phil Fonderco, I think, yeah, Phil Fondarcaro, John Hurt, John Hudson, and yep. So, okay, now on to the movie's plot. The movie takes place in the fictional location of Bradane, where there is this assistant pig keeper called Tarin, who is an assistant keeper to this man called this old man called Balden, I think his name is. Yeah, I've just yeah. No, Dolben. Dolben, that's it. Yeah, Dolben. And together they're raising this pig called Henwin, who, unknown to Taran, has these powers that can enable people to see visions of other people's thoughts. She can reveal them in water. And then what happens is one day, where the film begins, we first meet Taran on the farm with Dolben, and he's up to his usual duties, cleaning the pig, Henwen, at the same time fantasizing about becoming Bradane's greatest warrior. And he's convinced that Dolben, him being an apprentice, him being his master, isn't convinced that Taran has what it takes to become a great warrior, and Taran's under the impression that he'll be a pig keeper for the rest of his life, until one day he knows until just the scene after that, where he notices that something is definitely troubling Henwin the pig, because she starts panicking and trying desperately to get away from Taran. So Dolben calls Taran and Henwin in to the house, and that's when Dolben reveals to Taran that he knew of Henwin's powers. I mean, we don't know actually where Henwin. We don't know where Henwin actually came from. This is the thing. We don't know where she came from. and we don't know much about Dolben, just that he's her keeper, and yeah, he reveals to Taran that why Henwin is a special pig, and uses water so that Henwin can reveal that indeed the dreaded Horn King, the villain of the film, has returned, and this is something that the people of Dibane are fearing most of all, and that the Horn King has discovered Henwin's power, to predict where to discover things with the aid of water. So Darbin figures out, yes, now the Horn King knows the secret about Henwin, that he is gonna capture her to find out where the Black Cauldron is, because basically the Black Cauldron can give the Horn King the power to bring all the dead back to life and form an army under his command to conquer the world. And so what he does, he tells Taran to go away with Henwin, and try to hide her. So Taran goes off thinking he's finally got his chance to prove himself, and as Taran goes off, he leaves the farm, and they come across this wild creature called Gurgi, who tries to steal Taran's apple. And at first, Taran is really frustrated with the task he's had, so he kind of just pushes Gurgi away because he's this annoying creature who appears to be stalking them, and because Henwin actually gets away from Taran, he escapes when he once again fantasizes when looking at his reflection in the water about being a warrior, and she slips away. So when Gurgi appears, Taran asks Gurgi if he's seen a pig, and Gurgi at first says no, he doesn't, because he can't really remember things, and then he says, but then he goes, oh yes, I did remember it, and he had seen it. So, but Taran doesn't believe him, thinks he's still just after his apple. So Taran goes off in the direction Gurgi told him that he saw Henwin going, and it leads him to near the Horn King's castle, and then he finds out Gurgi's followed him, because now Gurgi is under the impression that Taran's his master. Since Taran is his master, because he feels Gurgi thinks that Taran likes him. Of course, Gurgi is this lonely creature that's been alone for a while, clearly because he's annoying and he's just seen as a nuisance. So, and what we see is that Henwin was actually captured by the Horn King's dragons. Yeah, and I will say the animation in this, particularly of all the creatures like the dragons and the Horn King particularly, and the castle scenes, the dark castle scenes, are really impressive for a film of its time. It's obviously it's all hand drawn, but it does look really impressive. And I do, yeah. That's one of the reasons why I like it. It's a fairly simple film. It's got a good plot to it. It's darker. It says what made it appealed particularly to children audiences at the time who were fans of Star Wars, because of its sort of dark nature about a hero versus a great villain. I suppose you could say that Disney perhaps saw a resemblance of Darth Vader in the Horn King. I mean, the Horn King is voiced by John Hurt, and and he fits the role really well. The Horn King's a great villain. He looks good, and so yeah. Back to the plot. Taran goes into the castle. He enters the castle, and there's actually a bar in the castle where all the Horn King's minions are, with his head minion, this goblin. And the goblin's clearly, with Gurgi, is one of the comic relief characters, basically like the comic relief villain. And when he makes it into the pub unseen, and the goblin orders the guards of the castle to bring in a prisoner, which they turn out is Henwin, because she was captured when she wandered off. And then the Horn King himself comes into the bar and orders the goblin to get water so that Henwin can show him the exact location of the Black Cauldron. And she at first refuses, but then Taran intervenes, and then once the Horn King knows that Taran is her keeper, he then makes and basically then what happens is when Taran tries to save her, the guards stop him, and then they actually nearly slaughter. They put Hedwyn underneath an axe on a log, so she's about to be slaughtered, but then Taran gives in and basically orders Hedwig to show them the location of the cauldron, so Hedwyn does. Then the pig boy Taran is thrown into the dungeons of the castle, where he supposedly meets the Disney princess of this film. Yes, this film does have a princess. She's probably not one of the main Disney princesses. So I've never seen her, I don't think, in any Disney princess merchandise, called Princess Olonwi, who has been captured also by the Horn King. And then they also meet this artist, this musician, who's also been captured and thrown into the dungeon, by the name of Fleur de Pen, who plays his harp, and he's kind of comic relief as well, but he plays a part. So when they're trying to find a way to escape the dungeon, they all get together, and Gurgi it turns out, tagged along, and behind Taran, so he finds them in the dungeon and helps them all escape. And Taran goes around, while going around looking for a way out, finds this grave of an old warrior in the dungeons, and it turns out has a magic sword. So he does a bit of grave robbing and takes the sword, and he discovers, through the assistance of fighting off the guards so they can escape, he discovers that it's magic, that it can basically cut anything. So when the guards try to strike them with their weapons, it actually can cut their weapons, like solid axes and things like that. With this really good animation, this beam that sort of comes from the sword, that's really good. And then basically they all get out, and then they come up with a plan to basically try and find the Black Cauldron, because now they've discovered now that the Horn King knows the location of the Black Cauldron. They have to get to it first, and Taran gets the idea that if they destroy it, it will stop the Horn King from releasing the army of the dead. Right, just trying to think. So they go along. They go along, and they find they go up to this river that has this magic sort of whirlpool in it, and they get sucked into this whirlpool, and which takes them down to this sort of fairy kingdom, where they meet all these fairies and pixies, these different coloured all fairies and pixies, which is quite a good fun scene. And of course then the main characters ask the people where they can find the Black Cauldron. And I'm trying to think, I can't quite remember. I've just watched the film. I just can't quite remember the location. Right. The underground kingdom, the fairy place, is actually called Fair Folk. That's where they meet all these characters, these fairies and pixies. Oh yes, the Black Cauldron apparently is hidden in a place called Morva. Morva, that's it. And with the agreement of one of the fairies, pixies, one of the underground people, basically, he takes them to the kingdom of Morva, where they're left outside this house, supposedly where the Black Cauldron is, and so they enter the house, which is apparently the place where lived in by these three witches, which are kind of supposed to be side antagonists. And yes, it turns out they have the Black Cauldron, but it's hidden amongst hundreds of others in the cellar. And they try, and when the witches encounter the main characters, they try to persuade them at first to take something else. Basically another item, a not perfectly ordinary item of kitchenware. But Taran uses his sword out of pure uninterest to destroy all the items that they try to give them, and then they're mesmerised by the sword's powers. So they get the idea: why don't they trade the cauldron for the sword? So at first Taran's reluctant to trade his sword, and even Fluda actually decides to try and give them his heart, which they have no interest in. And one of the witches actually has a big crush on Fluda because the witches normally turn intruders that come into the house looking for the cauldron. They normally turn them into frogs and eat them. And the leader of the witches actually turns him into a toad, but then because one of the other one's in love with him, she changes him back. And there's this really funny scene that when he's an actual toad, he gets stuck in between her breasts. That's quite funny. In a child-friendly way, of course. Then, so yes, Taran eventually agrees, because when he accepts the fact that they won't accept anything else in exchange. So he agrees to give him his sword, and it turns out that the Black Cauldron is actually hidden underground under the house. So they give them the cauldron, but then they explain to the characters that the Black Cauldron can never actually be destroyed. It can only its evil powers can be stopped if a living being of their own free will jumps into it, and supposing the person that jumps into it, it'll cost them their life. They'll die. So after that, the witches leave the scene, and but yeah, just as Taran's proposing the idea that he should be the one to jump into the cauldron, they're all captured with the cauldron by the Horn King's dragons, taken to the castle, and then now the Horn King has the cauldron now in his possession. So the Horn King basically drops a skeleton of an ancient dead warrior in, which resurrects all the dead army from the past hundreds of years, and sends them out into the kingdom to start doing his evil bidding. And then Gurgi, who escaped and managed to avoid being chained up in the dungeon, sneaks through the window, unties all the characters, and then Taran realizes the only thing he can do to stop the plot, to stop the Horn King's plan now, is to jump in the cauldron himself. But just as he's about to, Gurgi gets in his way, and Gurgi says that Gurgi has no friends and Taran has many friends, so this is the best thing Gurgi feels he can do. So Gurgi jumps into the cauldron himself, which basically, yes, stops the cauldron's powers. And all the resurrected skeleton warriors die, and much to the agitation of the Horn King as he's watching them go across the castle's bridge into the kingdom, but they start to die, and like many of these big villains do, they take their anger out on their henchmen. So the Horn King takes his anger out on his goblin, mainly by choking him, but then when they go back to the dungeon, he finds that Taran is indeed the responsible one, the pig keeper. So there's this battle, final sort of battle confrontation between Taran and the Horn King, and Taran tries to stay behind to get to the cauldron while it's supposedly sucking back all the souls of the dead people, and the Horn King grabs Taran and tries to throw him in, but coincidentally, because the Horn King is pure evil, the cauldron sucks him into the cauldron, and then he kind of burns, and the cauldron basically kind of implodes on itself, and then it's useless, its powers are all gone. So the Horn King is then destroyed, and then
and then this finally makes the goblin really happy when he finds out he hasn't got a master anymore. So he just leaves the castle with the dragons, and the impact of the Horn King being absorbed by the cauldron causes the castle to collapse, and yet they all get out safely, finding a boat in the docks of the castle, but they all manage to escape in time. And then, of course, what happens is the witches then come back, saying now that the Black Cauldron is useless to Taran and the other characters. They decide to take it back. But of course, then Fludapen reminds them that they have to bargain, they trade. So the witch, of course, that has the crush on Fludapen, offers the sword back to Taran in exchange, but Taran realises that maybe he's not meant to be a warrior, he's a better pig boy, and so he agrees. So they just keep the sword. As their intention, the witch's intention was to end up with the sword and the cauldron, because they realise that they can easily manipulate Taran into trading in the sword. But once the cauldron's no use to them, they can take the cauldron back and they'll have both. So then what happens is, so Taran doesn't accept the sword, but he says he would trade the cauldron for Gurgi. And of course the witches first say it's not possible, but Fludapen kind of tricks them into showing their powers and bringing Gurgi back to life by trying to force them to admit that they've got no real power. So yes, the witches take the cauldron, and then what's left with the main characters is what seems to be Gurgi's lifeless body. But as soon as when Taran picks him up, and Taran starts to cry, and then suddenly you find out, yeah, Gurgi's alive, he's okay. So basically it's a happy ending, and then you see back at the farm, Dolben and Henwin watching a vision of all the characters going back to Bardane. So yeah, it's a happy ending. So yeah, well, that's basically the plot of the film. So it wasn't as fairly well received in its original release. I don't think it was the same two directors as the previous Disney classic, The Fox and the Hound. Yes, Todd Berman and Richard Rich. And but it has been re-released many times. It says it's yet to have a official Blu-ray release, but hopefully it will get one eventually. Yeah, it's gained a very loyal following over the years. It has a 55% rating on Rotten Tomatoes currently, and the Los Angeles Times praised it originally for its animation, and said, yeah, it's particularly aimed at youngsters that had an interest in Star Wars and that particular genre of movies, because of the dark tone of the film kind of is a bit reminiscent of films like Star Wars. And it was the London's Time Out magazine that deemed it a major disappointment. I personally wouldn't have gone that far if I'd seen it originally. I wouldn't have thought it was the best. It doesn't hold a place, I think, like these real classics do, like Snow White, The Lion King, Aladdin, all those ones. But it is a good film. It is quite a good little animated film. And I say it's one I've grown to really like since I first saw it as a kid. So yeah, I mean, if you've not seen it, I would recommend for Disney fans. You should check it out. Okay, so that's my review on The Black Cauldron. Thanks all for watching. You're all awesome. See you soon. Bye.